It's time to do the shelves on the north wall of the kitchen. And I'd like to have these shelves float on the wall so that they won't attach to the side wall, or they won't have any brackets underneath. I thought about making a box so that you'd sort of have the vertical piece to help hold the shelves up. But what I really wanted these to do was to float. The method I wanted to use was to use steel pins that would go into the studs in the wall and then come out and go into the shelf and hold the shelf up. I needed to find the studs, but even more than that, I needed to find the center of each stud so that my pins would be centered on them and not near the side. I didn't want a pin that was sort of half in the stud, or sort of mostly in the stud. I wanted them really centered. So I used several different methods to find the studs. First by knocking on the wall, and then a little bit of the stud finder, and then measuring to kind of check to make sure they're 16 inches on center. Before I had covered the wall up, I had marked on a 2x4 where the studs were. So I used that as well to check to see whether I was close. And things were making sense. But in the end, what I did to really make sure I was centered on each stud was to find the edge of the stud by drilling holes into the wall. I figured that the shelf would cover up the holes that I was drilling, so it really wasn't that big a deal that I was putting holes in the wall. I could drill a hole about where I thought the edge was and find a spot where there wasn't a stud, and then where there was a stud, and then I would know that the edge was between those two holes. And then from there I could measure over to the center of the stud. So to do the pins and to get them in the same place on both the shelf and the wall, I made a stick, basically a story stick for the project. So I cleaned up a 2x4 and got it nice and straight and nice and square. Then once I had that, I could mark where to drill the holes in the 2x4 based on where the centers of the studs were. I could then drill the holes into the 2x4 as straight and as square to the 2x4 as I could. I got this long drill bit that's the same diameter as the steel that I got for the pins, so that I could go through the 2x4 and then into the wall. Now I figured if I just held the 2x4 on the wall and tried to drill the holes, it would move. So what I did was mounted the 2x4 to the wall with screws so that it was in place and it wouldn't move between each hole as I drilled them. I figured out the depth that I was going to need to do, which for the studs was basically making sure that I didn't drill all the way through the wall. So the 2x4 both spaces the holes, but it also holds the drill square to the wall. And I can pull the 2x4 down. Now I'll make the pins. I got a 5/8 inch steel rod for this. I found the Sawzall with a miter box actually works really well for cutting steel. And I cleaned up the little burr on the cut. And then I could put the pins in the wall, and they seemed fairly square. And I tapped them in. They're fairly tight. I'm not sure I can get these out at some point in the future if I need to. Now for the actual shelves, we got a thicker piece of bamboo plywood. It's the 5-ply sheet, so it's 1.5 inches thick, and it's heavy. Now it's 8 feet by 26 inches, I think, so it's a little smaller than a full sheet. The cutting was easy. It was more that pushing the weight on the sled was what was difficult. I had to jerry-rig the clamp on the sled just a little bit, and I cut the shelves. I first cut the length, and then I cut the 2 widths that I needed. And that's basically the woodworking on this project. So then I took the same 2x4 story stick with the holes in it and clamp that to the edge of the shelf, and I can then drill the holes into the shelf, and they'll both be spaced correctly and have the same angle, hopefully. If there's any tiny variation off of 90, it'll be part of the stick. When doing this, I started with my cordless drill, which was working, but it was slow. So I tried the corded drill, and that worked a lot better for this. Now, something that was in the back of my mind up to this point was that if I was drilling holes in the wall and in the shelf that were both tight to the pins, my story stick wasn't going to be accurate enough for everything to slide together with the holes and the pins that tight. When I took the shelf up to try and put it in, there was just no way it was going on like that. So I went and got a little bit bigger drill bit. I think it's 11/16. So sort of the next size up. And I drilled out the holes in the shelf. This gave me the little bit of wiggle room in the holes to allow the pins to slide onto the shelf on the wall, but still kept it tight enough that the shelves weren't loose on the pins. Something I'd wanted to do all along was to put lights under the shelves. So the idea was to cut a slot in the bottom of the shelf and put an LED strip light into that slot. So with the router, I cut a slot on the bottom of the shelf. Now it's turned out where the lighting in the kitchen is actually pretty bright, and I really don't need the lights under the shelves. But I figured this has been the idea all along, so I'm going to go with it. And then some finish. I sanded just before this, I think with 220 and then 320, the same as the cabinets. And with these I did all 6 sides. So you can see how the shelves just slide onto the pins and are held in place. So those 2 wires that have been sticking out of the wall for the whole kitchen project are for the lights that go under the shelves. So I stuck the lights into the slot, and they seemed to work, although the next morning when we got up, part of the light was starting to come down. So I'm thinking I'm going to have to figure out how to attach the lights better to the wood, like some hot glue or something. Better glue than the sticky that's on the lights. And the slot on the upper shelf casts a funny shadow on the wall that I don't really like. So I may go back and cut that slot a little wider so that edge isn't in the way and casting a shadow. So it worked. It took a lot of fiddling to get the pins to work and to get the shelves to kind of sit right and to get the lights to work, but they look good in the end. When we were first envisioning these, I was figuring the plates would go on these as well, and the shelves would be 10 inches deep. But when we started to really think about that, it seemed really big, and whether we really needed to do that. So we ended up going with 6-inch shelves and just using them for cups and possibly small bowls. So the shelves are sort of half storage, half art on the wall in a way. So we need to make sure that what goes up there looks good, I guess, because it's totally open. Thanks for watching.